Good evening, friends, and welcome to Dreary December 2025. And happy Christmas week to everybody who celebrates.
Happy Christmas!
This week's story is Old Hooker's Ghost, or Christmas Gambles at Huntingfield Hall. Originally published anonymously in 1865. Chapter 1. An Introduction to Huntingfield Hall and its Inhabitants. At that period of the year, when rain, wind, and frost have, by their combined powers, stripped the trees of their foliage and plucked even the last rose of autumn from its stem, a large merry party of all ages were collected under the hospitable roof of the warm-hearted, generous Sir Gilbert Alderton of Huntingfield Hall, prepared for a Christmas campaign of fun and jollity. Sir Gilbert should be described before his mansion. He stood 6 feet 2 in his stockings. His figure was broad, stout, and well built, his countenance oblong, with blue eyes, large and expressive, a longish, well-formed nose, and a mouth from which a benignant smile was seldom absent. He might be taken as the beau ideal of an English country gentleman. His eldest son, Gilbert, a fine, handsome young fellow, very like him in appearance and manners, was at college, and soon about to come of age. His next was in the army, and the third, Charlie, the delight of his mother, the favorite of the household and the whole neighborhood, was serving his country at sea, in the exalted position of a midshipman. But never mind, he intended some day to be an admiral, and to thrash the French or any other enemies of old England with right good will. There were several other younger boys, and 3 daughters, known to the country round as the 3 Graces, lovely young creatures, fair and gentle, with refined, elegant figures. It would have been difficult to find a more beautiful girl than Mary Alderton, the eldest. She was a year older than Gilbert, and the others promised to equal her. Then there was Lady Alderton, a true English matron, kind and gentle, and thoughtful and dignified and curious, utterly above the littleness of common minds. She was the very antipodes of vulgarity, yet she was full of animation and humor also, and could keep everybody alive and make them happy. At least, it was their own fault if they were not so. The hall at Christmas was always full of guests, for Sir Gilbert delighted in seeing happy, joyous faces around him, and relations and friends, old and young, of high and humble degree as far as purses were concerned, were assembled. The life and spirit of the house was a certain Mr. Giles Markland. Everyone called him Cousin Giles. All the young people, not learned in genealogies, thought that he was their cousin, though they did not know how. He was, however, really a cousin of Sir Gilbert's, who valued him more for the qualities of honesty, simplicity, and kindness of heart which he possessed, than on account of his relationship. The Miss Aldertons were not looked upon as clever, though there could be no doubt that they were well brought up, and possessed the usual accomplishments of young ladies of the 19th century. But among the guests was a niece of Lady Alderton's, Miss Jane Otterburn, who was considered a genius, for she wrote poetry, had a vast amount of imagination, acted well, got up charades, invented games and amusements of all sorts, and indeed, in the house, ably seconded Cousin Giles, who was himself the prime mover of all out-of-door sports. She was a small, dark, quick, active, bright-eyed girl, or rather young woman, for she was well out of her teens, and acknowledged by all to be very pretty. Indeed, in that respect, she might have vied with the Miss Aldertons, and as a partner was a greater favorite than they were. She was an orphan and had a good fortune, which made her doubly interesting. In The Art of Weaving an Extemporary Tale of Fact or Fiction, Jane Audubon's fertile imagination burst forth with a brilliancy which few could equal. The most complete contrast to her in the house was also a distant cousin of Sir Gilbert's, Susan Langdon. She was good-natured and fair and fat and deliciously dull, as Cousin Giles used to say. She was a general and well-satisfied butt, for she was, he added, too obtuse to observe the shafts aimed at her, or too good-natured to mind them when they struck her harder than usual. She had a mother very like her, and a brother Simon possessed of the same characteristics, who always chuckled and rubbed his hands together when he discovered any tricks played on Susan, not perceiving that similar ones being practiced on himself. However, the individual members of the party must be made to appear as they are required. Christmas Day arrived. Everybody went to church over the hard, crisp ground, and the sacred edifice was decked with holly and bright red berries, and there were appropriate inscriptions under the organ gallery, and the subject of the sermon incalculated on the congregation was peace and goodwill towards their fellow men, and no one would doubt what Sir Gilbert practiced as they saw the smiling, pleased countenances of the villagers as he passed among them. Then there was a luncheon and a brisk walk taken by the younger people, Cousin Giles leading, among hedges no longer green, and woods denuded of leaves, and by ponds, to judge how soon the ice would bear, and a dozen or more cottages visited. And gifts bestowed on old people unable to move out, he singing joyous carols, and Jane Audubon discoursing learnedly on the nature of frost and snow and hibernating animals, and on other topics suggested by the season. And Susan Langdon, laughing she knew not why, except that she felt happy, and Simon trying to play her a trick, but not having the wit to invent one. The Miss Aldertons talked pleasantly, listening to their brother Gilbert's remarks, or conversed with young Lord Hurston and Captain Fotheringsail of the Navy, dividing their attentions with praiseworthy impartiality. Then came the dinner. Old English fare, but better cooked than formerly. Roast beef and turkey and plum puddings and mince pies, all decked with holly, and lighted brandy to warm the pies and puddings, and no lack of generous wine of the best, and a real grace said by the minister, present with his family, and a blessing asked. Little attendance was demanded from the servants when the cloth was removed, for they too were enjoying heaven's bounteous gifts, bestowed through their kind master's hand in their hall below, decked with holly on one end, with the aid of screens and boughs, forming a tasteful stage. They were passed over. Voices outside announced the arrival of the carol singers, and they being speedily admitted, and after partaking of refreshment, arranged on the stage. The whole family from the drawing room assembled in the hall to hear them, Sir Gilbert sitting in front, with purse in hand, giving many an encouraging and approving smile. They gave place to mummers, the great satisfaction of the younger part of the audience. There was Father Christmas and his attendant sprites, hail, frost, and snow, and heroes innumerable, dressed in paper hats, helmets, and armor, decked with spangles and ribbons, and swords of wood, and long spears, altogether a motley group. The Duke of Wellington and Napoleon Bonaparte, Nelson, Stout, and Blucher, the Black Prince and Julius Caesar, the Duke of Marlborough, and Richard of the Lionheart, and numerous other men of renown of all ages, brought together with delightful disregard to historical correctness. They fought one with the other, and fell mortally wounded, the great Duke of modern days alone surviving, when a new character rushed in, a doctor with a nostrum to cure all complaints, and, applying it to their noses, with some words of a cabalistic character, which sounded like, "Take some of this riffraff up thy sniff-snaff," he set each dead hero on his feet, ready to fight another day. "That gentleman would have wonderful practice if he could be as successful among the public as he has been tonight," observed Cousin Giles, while Sir Gilbert was bestowing his largesse on the performers. "Let's have it all over again." "Encore, encore," was shouted by the younger members of the audience, and not unwillingly, the actors, with the utmost gravity, went through their parts without the slightest variation of word or gesture. Tea over, the juveniles were invited into the dining room, where, at the farther end of the table, a hideous witch was seen presiding over a huge bowl, from which suddenly, as the lights were withdrawn, blue flames burst forth. Whoa. And the witch, her long brown arms extending over the bowl, grew more hideous still, and a voice was heard inviting them all to partake of the contents. Hot raisins, sweet raisins, nice burning raisins. And but a few hung back, for the voice was not unfriendly, and was easily recognized as that of Cousin Giles. And when they had seen their own faces turn blue and yellow and green, and the raisins were all gone, the witch sunk down under the table, and Cousin Giles popped up, and the witch was gone. Then came games of all sorts, old and young joining with equal zest, led by Cousin Giles and Jane Otterburn. Now all were silent to listen to, and many to join in, a Christmas carol sweetly sung, and family prayers were held, and scriptures read, and Christmas Day was over, and all retired, with grateful hearts and kindly thoughts of one another, to rest. Chapter 2. A Tale of a Ghost.
Ooh.
There is said to be a skeleton in some out-of-the-way cupboard of every house. There was one in Huntingfield Hall. No one liked to speak of it, though. Even the jovial Sir Gilbert shunned the subject. The morning had been spent on the ice. Several of the ladies had put on skates for the first time, and the gentlemen had exerted themselves till all were tolerably tired. Still, games of all sorts had gone on as usual for the sake of the younger members of the party, blind man's bluff and hide and seek suiting best the taste of most of them, no one thinking of the tale of the old oak chest or dreading a fate similar to that of the heroine. At length, even the most active had had enough of movement, and a general cry was raised for a story from Jane Otterburn. Cousin Giles pressed the point, and Jane was led within a large semicircle formed round the fire, Sir Gilbert taking his usual seat on one side, and Lady Alderton on the other. She took a low seat, with one arm resting on Miss Alderton's chair, her dark locks falling over the light blue dress of her fair cousin, while her other hand held a feather screen to guard her eyes from the fire. "Now, Jane, now, Miss Otterburn, your story," cried several voices, old and young. Jane waited a moment in silence, gazing at the fire, and began. There was an old family, whose ancestors were among the Norman conquerors of Britain, and who had ever since owned the same estate in the centre of England. The ladies were fair and virtuous, the men brave and upright, but proud of their birth and somewhat haughty withal. They had fought for King Charles and sided with James to the last, though they became loyal subjects of William of Orange, and, whatever their sympathies, having sworn to acknowledge him, they took no part with the supporters of the Pretender. At length, a certain Sir Hugh Oswald became the head of the house. He had a son and a daughter, of whose good looks, manners, and general bearing he was justly proud. He was proud, indeed, of all things belonging to himself, and it would have been difficult to persuade him that they were otherwise than perfection. It was on a dark night in November, the wind was howling and whistling through the trees, and the sleet and rain came pelting down with a fury which drove even the most hardy under shelter, that young Hugh Oswald left the hall by a side door, and took his way across the park towards the keeper's cottage. At his tap, the door opened, and a young girl, fair and beautiful as a houri, who had been sitting reading by a lamp, stood ready to receive him. "Dearest Hugh, you know I love to see you, but what a night for you to come out and leave the gay party assembled at the hall." "The very reason that I came, as no one will suspect, even if I missed, that I have left the hall, my own sweet May," answered Hugh, folding her in his arms. What more was said I need not describe. This was only one of the many stolen visits to the keeper's lodge, strange as it may seem, known of and suspected by no one at the hall. At length, Hugh obtained leave from his father to travel. He had seen little of England, nothing of the continent. He was absent for some time, and then he wrote to say that he had taken a step he hoped his father would forgive, though he had acted without first seeking his sanction. He had married a girl, young, lovely, and amiable. It was only necessary to see her to love her. He entreated forgiveness, and hoped that his father would receive her as his bride. The answer Sir Hugh sent was more favorable than might have been expected. Still, He remarked that his forgiveness must, of necessity, depend on the circumstances. Hugh, on one pretense or another, delayed returning home, not trusting, apparently, to the circumstances on which his forgiveness depended. At last, Sir Hugh, losing patience, or suspecting that all was not right, peremptorily ordered his son to return. The young couple came. Hugh had not overpraised his wife's beauty. Sir Hugh gazed at her earnestly without speaking, then took his son aside. "Hugh," he said, "you do not know whom you have married, but I do. There is no happiness for you on this side of the grave." Not another word would he say, notwithstanding all his son's solicitations for an explanation. Little did he know what at that very moment was taking place. It was summer. In a distant part of the shrubbery, in a bower covered with roses, jasmine, and other creeping plants, stood Emily Oswald, waiting with anxious gaze and beating heart the coming of one who had declared himself her lover. He came. His dress was rustic, but his figure was refined, his countenance eminently handsome, and his bearing manly. He showed no timidity as he approached the young lady, for he was evidently confident of her love. He urged her to fly with him. He pleaded his devoted love and affection. He told her that he knew her father would never consent to their union, and that it would be better to marry without his sanction than after he had refused it. She listened credulously, and too readily. She fled with him. Her subsequent history I will not detail. She believed that the peasant youth, the keeper's pretended son, was a noble in disguise. She was not missed till late at night, and when sought for throughout the house and grounds, no trace of her could be found. Not till 2 days afterwards did Sir Hugh discover that his only daughter, the beautiful child of whom he was so proud, had fled with the keeper's son, the brother of the girl whose own boy Hugh had married, and thereby entailed, as he conceived, eternal disgrace on his family. Yet, as if that were not enough, Emily, his trusted child, must commit an act to increase the stigma tenfold. He suspected, too, that the wound to his feelings had been premeditated, and he knew, too, the foe by whose machinations it had been accomplished. The baronet took his gun and wandered forth into the grounds. Such was his constant custom. He seldom went out without his weapon. It was said that he met the keeper, a man who had strangely come to the place and sought for employment in that situation, that Sir Hugh had charged the keeper with acts of villainy and treachery, that the other had insultingly retorted that a fierce struggle had ensued. 2 days afterwards, the body of the keeper had been found, shot through the breast, in a remote part of the grounds. Rumor pointed to Sir Hugh as the murderer, but he was never accused openly. It was further asserted that the dying man had foretold that his spirit would haunt the hall for 10 generations, and that during that time the eldest son should never succeed to his inheritance. Sir Hugh appears to have been severely punished, at all events. The fate of his beautiful and beloved daughter was a sad one. The keeper's son, though talented, was utterly unprincipled, and she died young from a broken heart. His sister, too, did not turn out as well as her young husband had anticipated. As she grew older, and more was expected of her, tastes and manners became apparent, which had been overlooked in a young pretty girl. Hugh died before his father, and Sir Hugh lived long, a sad and childless old man, and his estate descended to a brother's son. "Where did you get that story, Jane?" asked the baronet, in a tone of annoyance very unlike that in which he usually spoke. "My dear Jane, where could you possibly have heard that tale?" exclaimed her aunt. "That is more than I can tell you," answered Miss Otterburn. "I thought that I had invented it, and I certainly drew on my imagination for the names, but I confess that it is possible I may have heard it somewhere. I often, when I fancy that I am inventing, find that I have heard the outline of the tale before. Neither Sir Gilbert nor Lady Alderton said anything more on the subject, though both were unusually grave. Other tales were told, in many of which ghosts and goblins played a prominent part. During the course of the evening, Cousin Giles took an opportunity of drawing Miss Otterburn aside. "What in the name of wonder, my dear Jane, induced you to tell that story?" he exclaimed. "Don't you know that it is connected with this house and Sir Gilbert's ancestors? You gave even the right Christian names of father and son. There can be no doubt that Sir Hugh really did shoot the keeper, Old Hooker, as he was called, and it is asserted and believed that his ghost haunts, as he threatened, the mansion of his murderer." "What, this very house?" exclaimed Jane, with a look of astonishment, and it might have been terror or some other uncomfortable feeling in her countenance. "Yes, if old women, housekeepers, and superannuated butlers can be believed, Old Hooker's ghost has appeared more than once or twice, stalking through the hall at midnight, no one daring to speak to it or attempting to stop it. You must understand that the family gave a different version of the story. They say that Old Hooker committed suicide in consequence of his daughter running off with young Hugh, who, they state, did not marry her, and of his son, of whom he was very proud, being transported for the abduction of Miss Alderton. With regard to the son, it is difficult to say who was most to blame. The young man had, I believe, raised himself by his extraordinary talents far above his former position, and he might have supposed the marriage with her would have advanced his ambitious projects, or he might have run off with her and treated her as he ultimately did, in retaliation for the way his sister had been treated by young Hugh. Still, I suspect that, at the best, he was an unprincipled fellow, and that not much can be said in favor of any of the parties concerned. However, they are all long ago dead and buried, and waiting to be tried by a tribunal which will measure out even justice to all men. So do not let us condemn them undefended. Chapter 3. Preparations for Twelfth Night. The story of Old Hooker's ghost was not again alluded to in the presence of any of the Ilderton family, as the subject was evidently distasteful to them. But it formed the subject of conversation among the guests, when only 2 or 3 were together, and at length throughout 1 or 2 of the ladies' maids. The story reached the servants' hall, where, of course, it was eagerly received. Lambeth the butler, however, shook his head when he heard it, and advised that it should not be talked about. "It may be true, or it may not be true, but there will be no harm come of letting it alone," he observed. Notwithstanding the wisdom of this remark, neither in the servants' hall nor above stairs would people let it alone, till at length many began to feel uncomfortable as the night drew on, and preferred having a companion when they had to traverse the long passages and corridors which led from wing to wing of the mansion. Jane Otterburn found that she had indeed raised a ghost of a character that she had little anticipated. All this time, none of the family knew what was going on, as, after it had been understood that Sir Gilbert and Lady Alderton disliked the subject, when any of them approached it, it was instantly dropped. In time, the costume Old Hooker had worn was minutely described. A hunting frock of Lincoln green with a leathern belt, a cap with iron bands, shaped somewhat like a marimbo's helmet, or the hat of a policeman of modern days, a powder horn at his back, high leathern boots, and a huge spear, which it must have required 2 hands to wield. This showed that he was a head keeper, a person of no little consequence, and one who must have proved a formidable opponent to deerstalkers and poachers of all descriptions. That he was above the ordinary keepers accounted for the superior education he had managed to give his son. Jane had talked so much and thought so much about the story that she was not quite comfortable herself, and more than once, when going somewhere late to bed, her door having suddenly burst open as she went to shut it, she thought she saw, the moonlight streaming through a window, a strange figure moving along the passage in the distance. She was a courageous girl, though imaginative in the extreme. So she watched the figure, wondering if it would turn. But it vanished apparently through the window at the farther end of the passage. She told no one what she had seen, believing that her senses had deceived her. But 3 nights afterwards, when, under precisely the same circumstances, the figure again appeared and disappeared, she was, to say the least of it, extremely puzzled and secretly agitated, though she still determined not to mention the occurrence. By the morning, she had recovered her equanimity, and as was lively and agreeable as usual. The gentleman thought her especially so, and the light-hearted, merry Captain Fotheringsail, whose breast, when in uniform, was covered with orders, seemed to have ears and thoughts for no one else. Jane liked him, but had a fancy that he had come to the hall as a suitor for the hand of one of her cousins. She was one of those happy beings who think so little of self that she always fancied that, if attentions were paid, they must be intended for some other person present. It might have been very stupid in the captain not to make his intentions more clear, but so it was, and Jane thought herself heart-free. It should have been mentioned that, on Christmas Day, Sir Gilbert and Lady Alderton had their hearts made glad by the announcement that their sailor son Charlie, who was on his way to England, and as he would soon get leave, might be expected shortly at the Hall. Several of the proposed amusements were put off till his arrival. Among them was a fancy ball, or masquerade rather, which it was settled should take place on Twelfth Night, should he write word that he would come in time. "Hurrah, Charlie is coming!" cried Gilbert, on opening a letter at the breakfast table. That delightful period of the day, in a well-ordered English household, when, rising refreshed by sleep, all the members met round the snow-white board, laden with sweet-smelling bread and rolls of all shapes, and toast and butter and fanciful pats, swimming in crystal bowls of pure water, and preserves in cut glasses, and, maybe, some delicate sausages or cutlets kept hot under covers, and fragrant tea and coffee, and china of elegant patterns, also cool and fresh and bright, and then the sideboard groaning with substantial viands. Yes, he'll be there by the 5th at latest, and, depend on it, if anyone is inclined to be slow, he'll stir them up. Charlie was a general favorite, though it must be acknowledged. When he went to sea, he was a somewhat harum-scarum fellow. Now, great preparations were making for the ball, and the costumes which were to be worn at it. There were to be knights in armor, and a Robin Hood and a Maid Marian, and Turks and Greeks and Albanians and Circassians and Hamlets and an Othello and a Rolla and a young Norval and a Virgin of the Sun and night and morning and the 4 seasons and a harlequin and a clown and a columbine. Indeed, it was difficult to say which characters were not to appear. But the best of it was that no one knew who was to be who, except, perhaps, Cousin Giles and Jane Otterburn and Gilbert, who were among the initiated. The ballroom was a magnificent hall, the pride of the country, and that was to be decked with evergreens with lamps placed amidst them, and bowers of flowers with which the hothouses alone could provide that season of year. "It would be great fun," said Cousin Giles to Jane, as they were busy over some of their plans. "I didn't think, really, that Sir Gilbert would be annoyed. What vexes him is to have the matter taken in earnest. I rather fancy that he doesn't believe the story himself. The dress is that of a society of foresters in this part of the country, and I can easily procure it." Jane looked thoughtful. Could it have been any one masquerading at night whom she had seen in the passage? Had she seen it but one night, that might have been the solution to the mystery. She did not like to mention the subject, even to Cousin Giles, for she had an idea that he would laugh at her. So she said nothing and kept wandering on. The 5th of January came, and the preparations were in a forward state, but Charlie had not arrived, though Gilbert did not seem much concerned, and said that he was sure that he would make his appearance at all events in time for the ball. Chapter 4. A Masquerade, an account of the part the ghost played at it. It was 12th night, and people from all the country round were assembling at Huntingfield Hall. some few in a sober modern costume, but the greater number in all varieties of fantastic dresses. A lady abbess came chaperoning a Columbine, an Italian flower girl, and a fair Parisian, and a magnificently robed pasha supported on one arm a demure Quakeress, and the other a somber-clad nun. But some glittering and trimming, which could be seen under her cloak, showed that she was not likely to remain long in that costume. A Virgin of the Sun entered arm in arm with Don Juan, and a Greek pirate with the Maid of Orleans, and a Saracen chief and a Russian noble were hand in glove, and a bog-trotting Irishman, with a dudeen in his mouth and a shilling in his fist, supported the arm of a somewhat stout Queen Elizabeth. Sir Gilbert and Lady Alderton appeared as a gentleman and lady of the time of Henry VIII, and their daughters with another young lady as the Four Seasons without masks. The fun began, and every effort was made to discover who was who, but so well disguised were many of the guests that this was often no easy task. Not only animals, but even senseless objects were represented, and among other things, a huge cask glided into the room. Remarks not overly complimentary to the talent of the occupant were made as it circled its way on, as if moved by human hands outside, in the usual fashion of making a cask progress. When a voice invariably replied, "I may be stupid, for I am a butt for the wit of others." After turning round and round through the room for some time, resting occasionally near some couple engaged in an interesting conversation, a voice from within seldom failing to make some appropriate comment, it stopped near one of the evergreen bowers, exhibiting a smiling, ruddy countenance, with a huge mouth, to the company, from which a loud peal of laughter burst forth. From that moment, it remained stationary, and when soon afterwards a clown, who had been inquisitively prying into every corner, began to knock at it, and at length attempting to get in, it was found to be empty. He on this set to work to trundle it away, and, as if fatigued, stopped again near the wall to be out of the way. A Columbine passing engaged his attention. To his apparent dismay and the astonishment of the guests, the tub began to move on of itself, he following, and pretending to be unable to overtake it, while he shouted, "Hello, you mesmerized butt! You stop! Hello! You spirit of a turn, a pipe of Cass, or whatever you are, or call yourself, stop! I say stop!" But the butt would not stop till it reached a deep recess, when he overtook it, and, pulling away at it, upset it, when, as before, it was seen to be empty. Meanwhile, an admirably dressed, although she had no mask, so well was her face disguised that no one seemed to know who she was, whether old or young, or tall or short. She had not to seek people out, but one after the other they came up to her, and with wonderful accuracy she told them who they were, and mostly what were their aims and wishes, what they had done, and what they proposed doing. Among others, a jovial sailor rolled up, pipe in mouth, and asked to what part of the world he should next be sent, how long he should remain, and when he came back, whether he should find his black-eyed Susan faithful and true. To the answer he got to the first question, he paid little attention. Instead of replying to the second, she desired him to describe his black-eyed Susan, to say how long he had been attached, and whether she returned his affection. His description answered exactly to that of Jane Otterburn. 3 weeks only had passed since he had seen her for the first time, but sailors can seldom enjoy more than a brief time of courtship, and have to sing, "Happy's the wooing that's not long a-doing." The point, in truth, about which he was most anxious was the return he might expect in his affection. The fortune-teller hesitated a little, and her voice was scarcely as clear and as high as it had previously been, as she replied, "True honest love, when it meets with a free heart and disengaged hand, seldom fails to obtain a return, and the honest love of a brave man, who, when no return can be given, changes to friendship, and he seeks wisely and soon some other object on which to bestow his affections. But, Mistress Fortune Teller, persisted Jack, suppose I care for Sue. And I does care for her. And for the very ground she treads on, does Sue care for me? That's the gist of the matter and what I want to know. Ask her yourself. If she is what you describe, she'll give you a sincere answer, answered the fortune teller, and her voice was still lower than before. But not this evening. Not this evening. You have nothing to dread, I suspect, she added. The sailor gave a sudden start and seemed very unwilling to quit the side of the fortune teller, who, after this little occurrence, greatly lost her loquacity and power of repartee, and she was voted by those who had not before spoken to her to be a very dull and uninteresting fortune teller. Her conversation with the sailor was interrupted by a cry from several of the guests, and from one end of the room there stalked forth a figure in a suit of Lincoln green, with hunting cap on head and spear in hand. The face of the figure was properly whitened, but there was a jauntiness in the walk and a twinkle in the eyes, as the ghost moved among the crowd, which soon betrayed the true character of the supposed visitant from the grave. He had not, however, reached one end of the hall before the eyes of the guests were turned towards the other end, where there appeared a figure in a similar costume, but more worn and stained, with what was evidently a winding sheet trailing behind. The countenance was deadly pale, and there was an unnatural glare in the eyes which it was painful to look at, while the features were rigid and fixed in an extraordinary manner. A curious halo, or mist, it seemed, surrounded the figure as it stalked along, turning neither to the right hand nor to the left, nor appearing to notice anyone in the room. No one ventured to speak to it and ask it whence it came, but 2 or 3 gentlemen who had come in characters of doubtful nature crept hurriedly out of its way. One was in black, with a pair of small chamois horns on its head, hooves on its feet, and a long tail, which he carried gracefully coiled round his arm. Another was a wood demon, a green monster with wings, claws, and horns. He was accompanied by a troop of imps, all of different colors, though bearing many of his characteristics, while a third represented a leaden blue-colored demon, produced in the unwholesome imagination of German poets. Everything about him was blue: watch, snuff-box, and toothpick case. He got out of the way with even more haste than the rest, to the great amusement of the little imps, who did not appear to have the same dread of the awful-looking beings as the rest. On it came, slowly and silently, people making a broad way for it, and some even hurrying out of the room with looks indicative of terror. The bright lights grew dim as it passed, so many afterwards declared. The fortune teller, when she saw it, started, and after scrutinizing it for a moment, became so agitated that, had it not been for her companion, who was evidently a fellow not to be daunted by even his satanic majesty himself, she would have fallen. The sailor, on seeing this, looked very much inclined to rush forward and bring the ghost, if such it were, to action, but the fortune teller, grasping his arm, held him back. No, do not interfere with it, she exclaimed. There may be more of reality in it than you suppose. The sailor, on hearing this, burst into a hearty merry laugh, which seemed to have some influence on the ghost, for it slowly turned its fearful eyes towards him, then turned back its head, and stalked, or rather glided on. Never fear, my fine fellow, but I'll find you out, and prove that a ghost can squeak if you can't speak, cried the sailor. Avast there, heave to, I say. I want to light my pipe, and your goggles will just suit my purpose. To this address, the ghost paid no attention, and the sailor seemed very much inclined to give chase, when, as it had got about 3/4 of the way down the room, Sir Gilbert, who had left it for a short time, re-entered. "What gramarye is this?" he exclaimed, with a look of astonishment and annoyance. "I did not suppose that any visitor to this house would have taken so unwarrantable a liberty. Whoever you are, I must beg that you will instantly retire, and only appear again in your proper costume. We have all assembled to enjoy ourselves in an evening of harmless amusement, and I cannot allow the opportunity to be taken to try the nerves of ladies and children, for I hope that all men present will perceive that it is only a remarkably well got up piece of mummery." The figure stopped for an instant, listening to this address, and then turned round so withering a glance that even the baronet was put out of countenance. He soon recovered himself, exclaiming, "Nonsense! Such things cannot be!" But the unusual expression of doubt and vexation which his countenance wore showed too plainly what were his real feelings. To have a ghost walk into his room without his will, or to receive a visit from any unwelcome visitor, is enough to annoy any man. And this post-sepulchral visit of old Hooker, if such it was, certainly was anything but pleasant. But, besides this, Sir Gilbert had been vexed at the non-arrival of his son Charlie, whom, in spite of his wildness, he dearly loved. He could not help fearing that he might have got into some scrape at Portsmouth, or have been detained elsewhere by some escapade or another. Probably, had Lady Ireton seen the ghost and been alarmed at it, he would have been still more angry at it than he was. That is to say, as far as his kind and genial nature would allow him to be angry. There was a dead silence after Sir Gilbert had spoken, but no one stepped forward to confront or stop the ghost, probably from the impression that such things cannot be stopped, or that unpleasant consequences would ensue if the attempt were to be made. At all events, the appearance of old Hooker passed on unimpeded until it reached one of the bowers at the end of the room, where no seats had been placed. When it got there, suddenly a blue flame burst forth, surrounding by which it vanished. "The mummery has been admirably got up, I must confess," observed Sir Gilbert. "Some of my household have, of course, been in the secret, but I wish that I had first been consulted. And now, my friends, let the dancing commence, as I must, before long, request you all to unmask." Some little time, however, elapsed before the equanimity of many of the guests was restored. At length, the gay strains of the dance music, and the exertions of Cousin Peter, who had reappeared as Robin Hood, and others, put them into their former good spirits, and they began to talk and laugh and joke as if no such unpleasant visitor as the long-buried old Hooker had appeared. When Cousin Giles was asked what he thought of the matter, he shook his head, and declared that he was in a very great hurry to get out of the room and out of clothes when the real thing so unexpectedly appeared. Sir Gilbert, as soon as he had seen his guests once more amusing themselves as if nothing had happened, sent his steward and 2 or 3 other trusty people to endeavor to discover what had become of the person, if person it was, who had represented old Hooker's ghost. They returned after searching in every possible place, declaring that they could find no one hid away, nor had they seen any one pass in similar costume except Mr. Peter, who had taken no pains to conceal himself. Very strange indeed," muttered Sir Gilbert. "Did you examine the attics, Mesham?" he asked his steward. "There are several old chests in the north lumber attic. Several of them contain dresses, and if they have been disturbed, it may give us a clue to the culprit. For a culprit I consider whoever played the trick, admirably as I must own it was done." "As to that, Sir Gilbert, with due respect to your opinion, I don't exactly like to be certain," answered Mesham, with a bow. "I have heard of a gentleman who came down to these parts with a Scotch name, I think, who could make tables turn and articles of furniture and musical instruments fly about the room, and the spirits of persons a long time dead, some of them in foreign parts, come and talk and say all sorts of things to people who like to ask them questions. Now, if this is true, and it is extraordinary to how many gentlefolks believe in it, I do not see why the ghost of old Hooker shouldn't walk about the house, or even through the ballroom, especially when he knew that somebody had been dressing up like himself, which of course I wouldn't be pleasant to him. And besides, Sir Gilbert, I didn't like it to say it before, that this is the very day, so it is reported, that he came to his end. And that's another reason why he wouldn't like people to be dancing and jigging away like mummers on his grave, so to speak. Masham was a dissenter of the Puritan school. An honest, upright man, always accustomed to speak his mind to his employer, by whom he was highly esteemed. In this instance, however, he went a little too far, and he acknowledged afterwards that he had never before seen his master in such a taking. "Nonsense, man, nonsense!" exclaimed Sir Gilbert. "The fellow you speak of is an impostor, an arrant humbug, and the people are geese who believe in him, whatever their station in life, more shame to them if they are well educated. That is a poor reason for believing that old Hooker's ghost should haunt the hall. Go and search again. I am resolved to have the trick discovered before the guests leave the house. They shall not go away and spread all over the country the story of its being haunted. Look first into the north attic. Take care, Mesham, that none of the servants set the place on fire by letting a candle fall in their fright, should a cat jump out or a rat move. I conclude that you know the chests I mean." "Oh yes, Sir Gilbert. I helped Master Charles to overhaul one of them 3 years ago, when he wanted to collect some dresses for a play. And I went up to the housekeeper, and we put them all safe back again the day after," answered the steward, hurrying off. Sir Gilbert was joined soon afterwards by Lady Alderton, who came to ask him the particulars of the strange story of which she had heard rumors, but which no one had ventured directly to tell her. "Merely, my dear lady, that someone has walked through the ballroom in a hunting costume to represent the old keeper Hooker, and because no one spoke to him or tried to stop him, they have taken it into their heads that what they saw was no living being but a ghost or spirit." "How very extraordinary! And that it should have taken place during the few minutes we were both together out of the room," observed Lady Alderton in a low voice. "I am disinclined to believe in such things, and yet this is more than I can well account for." "Oh, nonsense, nonsense, Lady Alderton," exclaimed Sir Gilbert, and yet his tone was not quite so firm as usual. "Depend on it, Masham will find it all out before long, and if he does not, Cousin Giles will tomorrow, though of course I would rather the trick had not been played. And now let us go back into the drawing-room." Not long after this, 2 most riotous sailors rushed into the room, insisting on playing leapfrog, tumbling over each other and committing a variety of eccentricities I've heard of in a ballroom. At last, one of them rushed up to Lady Alderton, and throwing his arms round her neck, gave her a hearty kiss, with his mask falling off, displaying the well-bronzed merry countenance of her son Charlie. He introduced his companion as a brother officer, whom he had invited to spend a few days at the hall. He was heartily welcomed by his father, who loved him in spite of his occasional wild proceedings, and of course his mother and sisters doted on him, and fully believed that he would turn out a second Nelson if he had the opportunity. The ball went off with the greatest possible spirits, and without any contretemps could the incidents which had been described be considered one. Masham came back and reported that the old chests had undoubtedly been opened and the contents tumbled out, as there were marks where the dust had been disturbed, but that he had discovered no trace of the person who had represented old Hooker's ghost. Chapter 5. More of the ghost's pranks and how he was finally laid. Sir Gilbert had allowed the adornments of the ballroom to remain undisturbed, that his tenants and others might see them, a favor of which was sure to be highly prized. The following evening, a large party were assembled in the ballroom, for the young people had declared that they should be far too tired to do anything but dance, and musicians were, therefore, retained, and all the people in the neighborhood invited to come back. Lord Hurston was glad of it, because he had made up his mind to propose to Miss Alderton, and, as other young men have done, fancied that a ballroom was a very good place for the purpose. Captain Fotheringsail might possibly have some similar ideas on the same subject with regards to Jane Otterburn. Charlie and his brother midshipman declared that they were ready for a dance every night of their lives. Jane had gone to her room after dinner, which was in a wing of the house away from the ballroom, and at this time as silent as at midnight. The evening guests had not yet arrived. A cheerful fire was burning, the flames from which sent at times a flickering and uncertain light through the room, but were generally bright enough to enable her to dispense with the light of her candles, as she sat down in an armchair to meditate pleasantly, as young ladies who have made a satisfactory conquest are apt to do. Though reveries of that description are pleasant, realities are pleasanter, and so she was about to get up to go down into the ballroom, when a feeling that she was not alone made her turn her head. And there, standing at the open door, was the figure of old Hooker the Keeper, exactly as it had appeared the previous evening. She was a courageous girl, but her heart beat quick, and she felt that she would very much rather it had not been there. She rose from her seat, determined to confront it, when, with a sound which might be described as a plaintive cry, it glided from the door. She bravely hurried after it, exclaiming, "Stop, stop, I must insist on knowing who you are." But the passage was in total darkness, and the figure had disappeared. She had heard of the phantoms of the imagination to which some few people are subject when out of health, but she felt perfectly well, and she had never had any visitation of the sort, and so, discarding all idea of a supernatural appearance, she felt convinced that somebody who had played off the trick on the previous evening had again dressed up to carry it on further. Still, therefore, undaunted but what might have frightened some ladies into hysterics, she lighted her candle, and drawing a large shawl over her shoulders, for the passages were cold, she prepared to descend to the ballroom. It would be too much to say that she had no uncomfortable sensation, or that she did not peer into the darkness ahead, and occasionally take an anxious glance over her shoulder, or that she altogether felt sure that she should not see old Hooker gliding before her, or noiselessly coming up behind her. She could not help allowing all the ghost stories she had ever heard to pass in ghastly review through her mind. Still, she tried not to walk faster than she should otherwise have done. Indeed, she foresaw that if she attempted to run, the wax taper she held would most probably be blown out. This, strong-minded as she was, she would very much rather should not happen. The keen wind of Christmas was blowing outside, and blasts here and there found their way along the passages, in consequence of one or two doors which ought to have been shut, having been left open. Huntingfield Hall was an old edifice, and the same attention to warming the passages and shutting out the wind had not been paid when it was constructed, as is in the case in more modern buildings. The young lady saw before her a door partly open, but which seemed at that moment about to close with a slam. To prevent this, forgetting her former caution, she darted forward, when the same blast which, as she supposed, was moving the door, blew out her candle. She knew her way, and remembering that a few paces farther on there were 2 steps, down which she might fall if not careful. A creeping feeling of horror, however, stole over her, when, as she attempted to advance, she felt herself held back. It must be fancy. She made another effort, and again was unable to move forward. Her heart did indeed now beat quickly. She would have screamed for help, but she was not given to screaming, and her voice failed her. Once more, she tried to run on, but she felt herself in the grasp of some supernatural power, as a person feels in a dream when unable to proceed. Her courage at length gave way. Every moment she expected to hear a peal of mocking laughter from the fiend who had held her, for her imagination was now worked up to a pitch which would have made anything, however dreadful, appear possible. At length, by an effort, she cried out, "Help me! Help! Pray come here!" The words had scarcely left her lips when a door in the passage opened, and she saw a person hurrying with a light towards her. "Thanks, thanks, Henry," she exclaimed, giving way to an hysterical laugh, as she sank into the arms of Captain Fotheringsail, feeling now perfectly secure against all enemies, either of a supernatural or natural character. "What is the matter, dearest?" he asked, in a voice of alarm. "Oh, nothing, nothing. My candle went out and I felt myself unable to move on," she answered. "I see you could not, for the skirt of your dress and your shawl have both caught in the door," he exclaimed, with a merry laugh, which did more than a dose of sal volatile or camphor would have done to dispel her fears, and taking his arm, she accompanied him to the ballroom. Should she tell him of the reappearance of old Hooker, or some living representative? Why not? She hoped always to have the privilege of enjoying his perfect confidence, and giving hers in return, so she told him what she had seen, or fancied she had seen. assuring him at the same time that she did not believe her visitor had intended to come to her room. Again, he gave way to a peal of merry laughter and exclaimed, "I am delighted to hear it, for now he will be caught to a certainty. I have not the slightest doubt that he intends again to visit either the ballroom or the servants' hall, but whenever he comes, we will be ready for him. I have an idea that your wild young cousin and his friend have no little to do with the trick, for I have ascertained that they arrived at the hall some hours before they made their appearance in the ballroom in the character of sailors. When I saw their proceedings, I rather regretted the character I had assumed, lest I should have been taken for one of the party." The guests were assembling in the ballroom as the captain and Jane reached it. People looked at them and smiled significantly, and some of them said, "I thought it would be so." One or two remarked, "Well, it is curious how the dark girls cut out the fair ones. Who would have thought that the little Miss Otterburn would have been preferred to her cousins, the Aldertons? Lady Alderton won't thank her, I think." However, Lady Alderton was as much pleased when she heard that Captain Fotheringsail, whom she liked very much, had proposed to her niece, as if he had made an offer to one of her daughters. And so people, for once in a way, were wrong. Captain Fotheringsail and Jane at once separated from each other, and went round to each of the guests separately, whispering in their ears. They instantly formed themselves into a quadrille, and the musicians struck up. On this, the captain slipped from the side of his partner, and adroitly ran a dark, thin line across the room, almost the height of a man's knee from the floor. The quadrille was concluded, and nothing happened. A valse was gone through, and then another quadrille was played. It seemed, however, that if the captain had hopes of catching the ghost was not to be caught. He begged Cousin Giles to ascertain whether old Hooker had appeared in the servants' hall or anywhere about the house. Cousin Giles had assured him that he knew nothing at all about the matter, and was on the point of going to perform his commission, when, from the exact spot where the ghost had appeared on the previous day, forth he stalked, looking quite as dreadful as before. The guests ran from side to side to let him pass. When just as he reached the middle of the room, he stumbled, made an attempt to jump, and then down he came full length on the floor. Off came a head and a pair of shoulders, and then was seen the astonished and somewhat frightened countenance of the simple Simon Langdon, who exclaimed, "Oh, Charlie, Charlie, I didn't think you were going to play me that trick." Finding that the trick was discovered, Charlie dashed out from behind a screen with a tin tube and lamp in his hand, and blew a superb blue flame over Simon, who was quickly divested of his hunting dress amid the laughter of the guests. Charlie and his friend confessed that they had induced Simon to act the ghost that evening, though who had played it in the previous one they did not say. "Well, young gentlemen, you have had your fun, and no harm has been done, though the consequences might have been more serious than you had anticipated," said Sir Gilbert. "It requires no large amount of wit to impose on the credulous, as the spirit rappers and mediums have shown us, and as we may learn by the exhibition of my young friend here and his coadjutors." And the baronet looked very hard at Simon and Charlie. He then added, in his usual good-natured tone, "However, as I said, no mischief has been done, though I must have it clearly understood that I cannot again allow old Hooker's ghost to make his appearance at Huntingfield Hall. Note, the author has to state that there is more truth in this story than may generally be supposed. A ghost or spirit of some sort was believed by a whole neighborhood to have paid occasional visits to members of his own family, and it was not till after the lapse of many years that one of them by chance heard of the story, which had not even the shadow of a foundation. The end. That's our fun Christmas one, I think. Yeah. Slightly less spooky than a couple of the others. Head over to Patreon. Patreon.com/drearymidnight. If you want to tell us your own spooky holiday story, it doesn't have to be Christmas related, send us an email, drearymidnightpodcast@gmail.com. And follow us on Instagram @drearymidnightpod. With all that said, Merry Christmas, happy holidays, and safe travels into 2026. We'll see you next week. Good night.
Good night.
And a mouth from which a benignant... How do I pronounce that?
What is it?
Benignant? Benignant. Alright. His countenance oblong, with blue eyes, large in expression. Good. God damn it.
He sounds like my type, by the way.
Looking for men in finance.
Yeah, he's
6'5", blue eyes. 6'2" in a country estate might sub for finance in 6'5". All right. The most complete contrast to her in the house was also a distant cousin of Sir Gilbert. She was a general and well-satisfied butt.
Okay. Oh my god. No wonder this was published anonymously.
I wonder if this person has somebody in mind. Maybe this is Cousin Giles. Cousin Giles. Drop in the chat. Alright. Damn it, Simon. What a name.
That's so many of our stories. What a name.
Yes. The Duke of Marlborough. Try
that again. Did you pre-read this? No. That's gonna be my new vocal stim. Take some of this riff raff of your snip snap. Okay, Elisa is currently dying in the middle of recording. We'll come back after these technical difficulties have been resolved.
I'm only 3 pages in. What the fuck? Okay. Oh my god. Good lord.
Take a laugh. Take a breather. Your reaction is funnier than the actual thing. You have to take this entire section and put it at the end of the episode, okay? I am requiring it.
Okay. Yeah, this blooper reel is gonna be fantastic, and 80% of it is going to be this section. Oh my god. Sorry. I was like, okay, I get myself together. And then I think about having to say sniff snap.
Just pretend it's a stupid Christmas play for the children, because that's basically what it is.
Yes. But then I think about that, and I'm like, okay, my niece and nephew are gonna say it. And it's like, I think it's hilarious if my niece and nephew say it too. Oh my god.
You're so dumb. Oh my god. Take a breath.
Again. I think I'm together, and then I think about having to say sniff snap.
I'm gonna ad-lib it for you.
Do you want to say it for me?
No. That's just more jarring.
Okay.
Just say it like 40 times, and
Sniff
then
snap,
it'll
sniff
stop
snap.
being... It's like how when you're in theater and they say the same joke over and over and over, and at some point it doesn't have as huge of a reaction anymore.
Yeah.
It's
Because
like
they've said sniff snap 27 times already, right?
Exactly.
Okay. All right. They fought with. Man, I know Snip Snap is coming. Oh my god.
Shut the hell up. I know Snip Snap's coming.
Okay. Whew.
I swear your reaction's funnier than the actual thing.
Yes. Okay. Yeah.
Take a breath.
Whew. Whew, 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 whew. All right. All right. All right. All right. They fought one with the other and fell mortally wounded. The great. Oh my god. The great.
You're just naming names.
I just did. I don't know what's coming. Oh my god. The great Duke of modern days alone surviving. When a new character.
All you have to do, you don't even have to reread that part because you read that part fine before. Yeah. All you have to
when
do
a new
is.
Character rushed in, a doctor with a nostrum to cure all.
Shut the hell up.
No, I'm a professional yapper. Good lord. All right.
It's gonna take us the whole thing just
to get this one paragraph. All right.
Breathe.
All right. I don't know why this is so funny. Good lord.
It's like the forbidden fruit. It's funnier because you know it's not supposed to be funny.
Yeah. And applying it to their noses with. I can't even do the leaders.
Just go. Just stand up and walk around.
Alright.
Give it to me. I'm gonna read it 40 times so it's not funny anymore.
Snap. What the fuck is a snip snap?
It's your nose. It's like a spell. Take some of this riffraff.
Thy snip snap. Oh, thy snip snap. Oh, thy snip snap. Take some of the riffraff. Oh, thy snip snap.
Oh my god. Every time you say it, I start laughing.
No, you don't understand my problem. Okay.
Oh my god. Isn't this supposed to be a scary story?
Well, it doesn't start off scary. We are 3 pages in. Oh my god, not even.
How many pages is it?
Like 20.
Girl!
No!
We gotta get through this.
We are 20 minutes into this recording, 5 of which are me not being able to say, take this riffraff up thy sniff snaff.
I gotta get home eventually.
Yeah, okay. He said each...
No, you said it. Now you just have to start from he said.
Okay.
Okay, now remember, it's a horror movie. It's a spooky
It's not supposed
story.
to be funny. All right.
This is why you pre-read.
I know. I should have pre-read. The one I was preparing and thinking about doing was like 50 pages long, so it's like I probably shouldn't do that. All right. Yeah. Cool. Whew. Made it through the hard part, hopefully. All right.